Kuzu Zangpola, welcome to Bhutan e-learning project. I'm Sonam Wangmo from Mutithang Higher Secondary School. This is an economics session for key stages 4 and 5. The topic that I have for today is in continuation to the previous lesson, that is on the elasticity of supply. So in the previous lesson, you have already learned about definition and the different categories or degrees of elasticity of supply. Now, my topic for today's lesson is on the determinants, and we will look into measurement of the elasticity of supply. Now, before I begin my lesson, I would like to state the main objectives of today's lesson. By the end of the lesson, learners should be able to, number one, explain the factors which determine the elasticity of supply. Number two, discuss the methods used for calculating elasticity of supply. 3, use percentage method to calculate the elasticity of supply. And the last one is the learners should also be able to calculate elasticity of supply of a point on a linear as well as on a non-linear supply curve. Now, with this objective, I will start my lesson by explaining the factors that influence elasticity of supply. Number one, behavior of the cost of production. Now, cost of production here refers to the cost that is incurred in producing a given quantity of output. Now, when these costs of producing additional quantity of output changes, the supply would also change. So, supply is going to depend on the cost of production. Now, if a firm increases, let's say if a firm incurs a slight increase or decrease in the cost of producing an additional unit of output, that is the marginal cost, then the supply in this case would be elastic, because it is not going to have a greater effect on the average price, because there is just a slight increase or decrease in the additional cost of producing an additional unit of output. But on the other hand, if a firm has to incur a huge increase in cost of producing an extra unit of output, then the supply in this case is going to be inelastic. This is because when there is a large increase in the cost of producing extra unit of output, the average cost is going to increase, and when average cost increases, the price of that commodity is going to increase. And as we know, when price increases, supply would decrease. So, in the second case, the supply is going to be inelastic. Now, the second factor is a time element. Now, the quantity of a commodity that is produced and supplied in the market is going to depend upon its production, how much the firm is able to produce. Now, this production in turn will depend on the availability of time. So, when we talk about time here, the time period can be classified into two. We have short run and long run. Now, in the short run, the supply tends to remain inelastic. This is because there are many factors that the producer will not be able to vary or change, and change in the price that results from change in demand will have a small effect on the supply, because in the short run the production capacity tends to be limited. So, in the short run supply will be inelastic, but in the long run, since all inputs are variable, output can be increased. So, in the long run supply tends to be more elastic. Okay, the third factor is the nature of the commodity. The nature of the commodity is another important factor that is going to determine the elasticity of supply. Now, if you classify the nature of the commodity into two, if you categorize into perishable and non-perishable goods. Now, non-perishable goods such as the consumer durable goods, such as like television, laptop, mobile, these goods, since they can be stored, producer will be able to respond to the increase in the price that results from the increase in demand by running down their stocks. So, in case of non-perishable goods, supply is going to be elastic. Now, on the other hand, we have perishable goods, goods like milk, vegetables and fruits. These goods cannot be stored. So, the supply of these goods according to the demand in the market can only be done through production of these goods. So, it will have to be produced to respond to the increase in the price in the market. So, in this case, in case of perishable goods, supply is going to be inelastic. Now, the fourth factor is availability of facilities for expanding output. So, here a producer's response to an increase in the price that results from increase in the demand in the market will depend on the production facilities. So, if producers have enough or sufficient production facilities, for example, if they have enough availability of inputs or enough availability of laborers, then supply is going to be elastic. They will be able to produce more. But if the producers do not have sufficient production facilities, for example, if they have shortage of power or shortage of fuel, then the production is going to be less. So, the elasticity will be inelastic in the case where a producer does not have enough production facilities. The fifth factor is the nature of inputs, the nature of inputs that are required in the process of production. If the production of a commodity requires the use of inputs that are readily or easily available, the supply is going to be more. So, in this case, supply is elastic. But if the production of a product requires the use of some specialized inputs or use of inputs that are not readily or easily available, then the supply is going to be inelastic. Okay, now the sixth factor is expectation on future prices. So, if a producer predicts or expects that there is going to be a fall in the price in future, the producer is going to increase the supply of that commodity by running down their stocks. So, supply is going to be elastic. But on the other hand, if producer expects that there is going to be a rise in price in future, the producer is going to hoard or reserve the commodity so as to enjoy the advantage of higher prices in future. So, in this case, the supply is going to be inelastic or less elastic. Okay, the seventh factor or the seventh determinant of elasticity of supply is risk taking. Now, as you all know, in any kind of production process, we have risks and uncertainty. Now, if entrepreneurs are willing to take risks, if they are, in other words, risk taker, then the supply is going to be more elastic. They will be able to produce more and supply more in the market. On the other hand, if entrepreneurs are reluctant, if they hesitate to take risk, or in other words, if they are risk-averse entrepreneurs, then the supply will be inelastic because they will not be ready to produce more and supply more because they will not be willing to take risks. So, in the second case, the supply is going to be inelastic. Okay, now the eighth factor, the eighth determinant is the length of production period. So, this is particularly talking about the time that is taken to produce a particular commodity. Now, production is a time and resource consuming process. So, any producer will not be able to increase or decrease the production of goods easily. This is because in many cases, in most of the cases, the production of a commodity takes longer time. It may stretch over to many months or even to years. So, in this case where the time taken is long, supply will be inelastic compared to those products where production time is less. So, time taken, if it is longer, it is inelastic. If the time taken is short, then it would be elastic. Ninth factor is related infrastructure growth. So, it is talking about this particular factor talks about the growth in infrastructures that are required in producing a particular commodity and then distributing that commodity. So, industry is usually an interconnected supply chain. So, you can see a new concept here, that is supply chain. So, supply chain here is a network of individuals, activities, resources, technologies that are involved in producing a particular commodity and then distribution of that commodity in the market. So, it is a network. I have an example of supply chain here. So, if you look at this figure, you can see that the raw materials that is available at the source, they are supplied by the supplier, they are taken to the manufacturer. The manufacturer will use these raw materials in order to produce goods, and that goods will be taken by the distributor, transported it to the market for the consumers to consume. So, you can see here this is a kind of network where it involves raw materials, activities, technologies that are involved in producing this particular commodity and then distributing it to the consumers. So, this is called a supply chain. Now, if you look at this supply chain here, if one part of supply chain grows, the other remains stagnant, then the growth here is going to be lopsided. So, this is going to have its impact on the elasticity of supply. For example, let us say the supplier is able to take all the raw materials from the source, it is able to supply it to the manufacturer. Let us assume that the production capacity is not sufficient, they do not have enough sufficient production capacity. So, because of that, the manufacturer are not able to produce more goods. So, when they are not able to produce more goods, the distributor will transport less amount of goods to the retailer, and then from retailer they will sell it to the consumer. Here in this case, the amount of goods that is supplied in the market is less. So, in this case supply is going to be inelastic. Now, if there is equal growth in the infrastructures that are used in these different sectors, if there is equal infrastructural growth in all these sectors, then the supply is going to be elastic. Now, the last factor that I have here is the mobility of factors of production. Now, as you all already know, we have 4 factors of production, that is land, labor, capital and entrepreneur. So, these 4 factors of production, if they are mobile, in other words, if they can be transferred from one use to another use, if they can be shifted to other alternative uses, then supply tends to be elastic because they will be able to produce more. But if they are not mobile, then the elasticity is going to be inelastic or less elastic. Okay, so these are the 10 main determinants of the elasticity of supply. Now, we will go to the next topic, that is, we will now look into the methods for measuring elasticity of supply. Now, here we have 2 important methods. First one is percentage method, the other one is a geometric method. Now, we will look into the first one. Now, percentage method, this method is also called as proportionate method. This is because in this method, we take the ratio of percentage change in quantity supplied by percentage change in price. So, that is why it is called as proportionate method. One point to be noted here, this percentage method is a common method that you are going to use to calculate elasticity for both demand and supply. Okay, now we have the formula. So, this is the formula for calculating elasticity of supply using percentage method. So, ES here is the elasticity of supply. So, ES is equal to percentage change in quantity supplied by percentage change in price. So, symbolically it can be written as delta Q by Q times 100 by delta P by P. This can be rewritten as delta Q by Q times P by delta P, and the ultimate formula that you are going to derive that is to be used for calculating elasticity using percentage method is delta Q by delta P times P by Q. Now, here delta Q is the change in the quantity by delta P is the change in the price, P is the initial price, that is price before the change, and Q is the initial quantity. Okay, now we will look into some few problems. First problem number 1. A seller sells 100 units of a commodity when its price per unit is neutrum 10. Supply goes up to 140 units as a result of an increase in its price to neutrum 12 per unit. Now, you are asked to calculate price elasticity of supply. So, this is the schedule that you are going to derive from the problem stated above. So, price, you can see initial price 10, it has increased to 12. So, when price increases, supply would also increase because we have a direct relationship between price and supply. Now, here first thing is, the first step you are going to do is you will have to find the changes in the quantity supplied. So, change in the quantity supplied is 40, then change in the price is 2, the price has increased by 2, the quantity supplied has increased by 40, and initial price is 10 and initial supply is 100. Now, after finding out these, now you will apply the formula and then insert the figure and then calculate. Okay, now you will apply the formula and you are going to insert the figure and then calculate. So, the value that you are going to get for this problem is 2, which is elastic. So, as we have already learnt in the previous lesson, that if the elasticity is more than 1, it is elastic. If it is equal to 1, it is unitary, and if it is less than 1, it is inelastic. Now, in this case, elasticity is 2, it is elastic, which means the supply in this case is more sensitive to the changes in price. Okay, now let us look into another problem which is slightly different than the previous one. Number 2, it says the quantity supplied of a commodity at a price of Niltrum 10 per unit is 1250. Its price elasticity of supply is 1. So, here in this case elasticity is already given, and now you are asked to find out the new price at which the quantity supplied will be 750 kg. Okay, so this is the schedule here. At price 10, quantity supplied is 1250. Now, the new price, you have to calculate the new price at which the quantity supplied decreases from 1250 to 750. Now, as I said earlier, in this problem elasticity is already given. So, when elasticity is already given, it is equal to 1, which means unitary. So, if your elasticity is equal to 1, it means that the percentage change in quantity supplied will be equal to percentage change in price. So, what you will do, the first step here is you will have to find out the percentage change in the quantity supplied. Now, what is the formula that you are going to use to calculate the percentage change in price? We have already looked into the previous slide. So, the formula that you are going to use to calculate the percentage change in supply is delta Q by Q times 100. So, delta Q is the change in the quantity, Q is the initial quantity times 100. So, the change in the quantity supplied is 500, initial quantity is 1250, it has decreased to 750. So, the change in quantity supplied is 500, your initial quantity is 1250 times 100. So, you will get 40%. So, here you can see that the quantity supplied has changed or it has decreased by 40%. So, there is a 40% fall in the quantity supplied. So, 40% of the initial quantity is going to be 500 kgs. So, if you subtract 500 from 1250, you will get 750. So, now since you know the percentage change in quantity supplied, elasticity equal to 1, as I said earlier, it means that the percentage change in supply is going to be equal to percentage change in price. So, when percentage change in supply is 40%, your percentage change in price should also be 40%. So, what you will do now is, the next step is you will have to find out the percentage change in price in order to find out the new price at which the quantity supplied is 750. So, 40% change in the price is now 40% of the initial price. So, it is Niltrum 4. So, you can see here that by Niltrum 4 the price has decreased. So, if you subtract Niltrum 4 from the initial price, you will get 6. So, 6 is the new price at which the quantity supplied is 750. Okay, now let us look into the second method, that is geometric method. Now, this method will be used to find out the price elasticity of any point that is given on the supply curve. So, this method is called as point method, because now you are going to calculate elasticity for a given point on a supply curve. So, it can be called as point method, or you can also call it as an arc method. Okay, now let us look into how we are going to calculate elasticity of supply using point method. Okay, so if this is the supply curve SS and a point on the supply curve denoted by the letter K here. So, if you are asked to find out elasticity for point K, you are going to use a geometric method. So, the first step here is you will first have to find out the amount of quantity supplied at point K. So, let us say it is OB, and the price at which OP quantity is supplied is OP. Now, what you have to do here, the next step is, now let us first look into the formula. So, the formula for calculating elasticity of supply using geometric method is AB by OB. So, here AB is the horizontal line segment and OB is the quantity supplied at that point. So, here now the next step is you will have to, after finding out the amount of commodity supplied at that particular price, now you will extend the line, extend the supply curve till it meets point A on the x axis. So, if you look at the formula, you can see AB by OB. So, AB is this line segment on the x axis, that is AB, and OB is the quantity supplied. So, now here you will apply the formula AB by OB. So, here look at the line segment of AB, the length of AB. So, length of AB, in this case AB is less than OB. So, OB is the amount of quantity that is supplied. So, AB is less than OB. So, if the length of AB is less than OB, or you say the value of AB is less than value of OB. So, in this case, the elasticity of supply is going to be less than 1. Now, let us look into another supply curve and try to see what is going to be the value for that supply curve. Let us say supply curve S1. So, on this supply curve, if you are asked to find out the price elasticity for point K, now again here what you will do, you will extend the line till it meets point A on the x axis. So, in this second case, let us say this is number 1. In the second case, you can see AB, the length of AB is now more than OB. So, in this second case, the elasticity of supply is going to be more than 1, because the value that you will get for AB is more than OB. So, the value is going to be more than 1. Now, let us look into a third case. Let us say S2, and again you have to find out the elasticity for point K here. So, as usual, you are going to extend the line till it touches the till it meets point A on the x axis. So, in this case now AB is exactly equal to OB. So, in the third case, the value of elasticity of supply is going to be equal to 1. So, so these are the different degrees that you have already studied in your previous lesson. So, I will not go into detail. Now, you have to remember a few points here. If your curve, if a straight line supply curve meets the x axis, your value is going to be the value of the elasticity of supply is going to be less than 1. If the straight line supply curve runs through the origin, your elasticity of supply will be equal to 1, and if the supply curve touches the y axis, the elasticity is more than 1. So, these are the different degrees of elasticity. So, these 3 important points that you have to remember. So, it says any straight line supply curve that cuts x axis, elasticity of supply is going to be less than 1 throughout the curve. So, throughout the curve they are going to have the same value for elasticity of supply. Then number 2, any straight line supply curve that cuts y axis. So, in this case it is talking about S1 here. So, any straight line supply curve that cuts y axis, the value you will get is inelastic, that is less than 1. And if any straight line supply curve that runs through the origin, so it is talking about this S2 here, S2 supply curve, the value of elasticity of supply is going to be equal to 1. Okay, so this is how you are going to use geometric method to calculate elasticity of supply for any point that is given on a linear supply curve. Now, we will look into how we are going to calculate the elasticity of supply at a point on a non-linear curve. Now, linear is if your curve is a straight line like this, non-linear would be a curve, not a straight line. So, you can use the same geometric method for calculating elasticity for any point given on a linear as well as on a non-linear supply curve. Now, let us look into an example here. Okay, so this is a non-linear supply curve. It is not a straight line supply curve, it is a curve, that is why it is non-linear. Now, let us say that you are asked to find out the price elasticity of supply for point, let us name it as F on this supply curve SS. Now, what you will do here is, unlike the previous one, unlike this linear supply curve, in the non-linear supply curve, you are not going to extend the line. This is because it is going to go into different direction. So, what you will do is, first you will find out the amount of quantity supplied at point K. Now, after that you will draw a straight line that is tangent to this point, point F. You are going to draw a straight line that is tangent to point F, for which you are supposed to calculate the elasticity of supply. Now, after drawing this straight line, you will take this tangency point to measure the elasticity of supply. Now, the reason why we have drawn a straight line that is tangent to point F is because at this tangency point, the slope of this straight line and the slope of supply curve is said to be equal. That is why we draw a straight line that is tangent to point F. Now, after drawing the straight line that is tangent to point F, now the next step is you will extend the line till it meets point A on the x axis, like you have done for the earlier problem. So, you are going to apply the same formula here also after extending the straight line. So, apply the same formula AB by OB. So, the same analysis here is going to apply here also. So, if your straight line touches x axis, value is going to be less than 1. If the straight line touches y axis, value is going to be more than 1. If it touches or runs through the origin, the value is going to be equal to 1. Okay, so these are the points that you should remember when you calculate point elasticity for a non-linear supply curve. And with this method, we come to the end of today's lesson. But before ending the lesson, let us look into lesson summary. Let us look into what we have learned in today's lesson. So, the first one is we looked into determinants of the elasticity of supply. So, we looked into 10 different factors that influence the elasticity of supply. Then the second topic that we did is on the methods. We looked into 2 important methods. First one is percentage method. Then the second one is point method. So, under point method, we also looked into how we are going to calculate point method for any given point on a linear as well as on a non-linear supply curve. Okay, now I have few questions for you to do it in order to find out how much you have understood. So, the first question is, number 1, inelastic goods are often described as necessities. Elaborate what happens to supply of such commodities with change in price. Okay, now the second question that I have for you is, in 2018, 119 metric tons of potatoes were produced in Phobjikha, up from 114 metric tons in the preceding crop year. Between 2018 and 19, the average price of potatoes increased from 3,710 to 4,590 per metric ton. Now, you have to calculate elasticity for this. Okay, now the third problem, the third question that I have here is, calculate elasticity of supply for points K, L and M on the supply curve in the figure. After calculating the elasticity of supply, I want you all to compare the degree of elasticity for these 3 points. So, the figure is, okay, so you will have to use this graph in order to find out elasticity for different points, that is K, L and M, and then try and compare. You have to compare the elasticity for all these different points. Now, with this question, I come to the end of my lesson. Thank you very much and see you all in the next lesson.